From MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
Good Wednesday morning. It's 5 o'clock. Welcome to Montana This Morning. I'm Victoria Hill. Thank you so much for starting your day with us. Our top story this morning, the masks in schools debate is growing more contentious as hundreds flock to the Yellowstone County Courthouse lawn to protest the Billings School District 2 mandate. Organizers called out Superintendent Greg Upham, saying if he doesn't reverse the mask requirement by Friday, they would start a petition to remove him from his job. Politicians are also getting involved. Montana Superintendent of Public Instruction spoke at last night's rally. Elsie Arnson says denying students entry to schools for refusing to wear masks is not allowed under the state constitution.
In an educational opportunity, it is demanded by our Constitution. It is demanded. So when school doors shut because you are not wearing a face covering or a medical device or a mask, is that equality in education? No!
The school board held a special meeting Tuesday afternoon. The first 2 hours were spent reading comments from community members about the mask mandate. Several supported Upham's decision, including one Billings grandmother who wrote, "It is so important to protect children, especially those who are unable to get the COVID vaccine." Upham is standing by his decision. He says 3 staff members have been suspended for 5 days after refusing to wear masks. 2 others have tested positive for COVID-19, and 2 student volleyball players at Skyview also tested positive. It was a breakout on the Skyview football team that led to Upham's mask mandate. Meanwhile, the local teachers union is among those coming out strongly against the mandate. Billings Education Association President Doug Robison called Upham's memo to staff over the weekend inappropriate and insulting. In a statement, the BEA says our issue lies with the superintendent's disregard of teachers' voices and our contractual language. Montanans honor their word, and the superintendent and school board trustees have failed to do so by continually violating signed agreements. Upham has stated his mask mandate is about keeping kids safe and schools open. The district is offering remote learning for any student who wants it. Now it's time to turn our attention to weather with Miller on this Wednesday. Miller, what's the story today?
Well, we're going to get a little warmer, but temperatures are going to stay below average. And now we're going to start to see maybe a stormy pattern kick in over the course of the next few days. And I'll explain all this with the main forecast coming up. Light surface smoke again expected this afternoon, so air quality should be excellent this morning. A little fair this afternoon as we may see a little bit more smoke come into play. 52 right now at the airport, humidity at 66%, winds out the northeast at about 8 miles an hour. Crunch the numbers quickly. Our high yesterday got up to about 73. Our overnight low got down to 54. We did have a top gust near 20 miles an hour. No rain yesterday. For the month, though, we're doing well above average. We're at 1.37 inches on the plus side for the month. In fact, if we were to stop right now, if I'm not mistaken, this would be the 7th wettest August on record for Billings. But of course, for the year, we're still over 3 inches in the hole. But over the course of the next few days, we have a chance to make some ground on that. Right now, we look at temperatures in the 40s and 50s. You can see little spots of rain through the area, and that could linger as we go along this morning. But as we get into later in the morning, early afternoon, that should stop. And then later in the day through this evening, that's when we have a better chance of seeing maybe some rain come back into the forecast. Highs today, you'll see in the 70s and maybe even some 80s off to our east. So we are warming up, but staying below average. Now, we like the rain. We just don't want severe weather, and unfortunately, we have to talk about that, something that may happen tomorrow. And more details coming up in the main forecast.
All right, we have to figure that out. And yesterday was just so pleasant. Finally, not too hot. Finally, not too much smoke. Decided to walk to school to pick up my daughter.
Oh, great.
Not such a good idea on the way back home.
What happened?
I let her play on the playground after school.
Oh.
And she didn't want to leave.
Oh, well, there you go.
And it just went downhill from there. I was like, okay, so built up those muscles.
Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. My wife has the same problem with me.
I don't want to go. No. You do that cross your arm things and sit on the ground too.
And feet, and sometimes
Miller,
I'm kicking and screaming.
Come
Happens.
on.
Hey.
Gotta grow up.
I'm a guy.
Guy, kindergartner, same thing.
Same difference.
All right, well, I will get back to the news.
Okay.
Thanks, Miller. As the Delta variant spreads in Montana, Governor Greg Gianforte will not reinstate a mask policy or mandate vaccines. However, he does encourage Montanans to get the shot, saying the proof is in the numbers. MTN's Jonathan Ambarian has more.
Governor Greg Gianforte said Tuesday that there's never been a better time for Montanans to get vaccinated against COVID-19, but he continued to stress his opposition to mandating the shot. At a news conference, Gianforte and public health leaders said evidence shows unvaccinated people are at much greater risk from the Delta variant of the coronavirus. The governor praised the FDA's full approval of the Pfizer vaccine, saying it's more evidence of the shot's effectiveness.
The vaccines have been researched. They've been rigorously tested, they are safe, and they work.
But Gianforte said people who are hesitant to get vaccinated aren't likely to be convinced by public figures. He urged them to talk with healthcare providers about getting the shot.
They don't want to hear from me, national figures, interest groups, or even the press. It's not effective. They want to consult with medical providers they trust, their doctor, and their pharmacist.
He said the state of Montana won't implement any mandate for COVID vaccination or return to a mask mandate. The state has reported an uptick in new vaccinations in recent weeks. Gianforte also sharply criticized the Biden administration for their handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, saying troops shouldn't have been pulled out before all Americans and their allies were safe from the Taliban.
But our withdrawal was a poorly prepared and rushed calamity, and it leaves many of them at risk.
He said the country has obligations to Afghan interpreters and others who helped U.S. forces, but that it's for local communities to decide how to relocate refugees. Gianforte said he's also pleased with Montana's improving labor force numbers in the months since the state implemented return-to-work bonuses, but he said inflation and COVID are continuing to hold the state's economic recovery back. In Helena, Jonathan Ambarian, MTN News.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. 8 inmates at the Yellowstone County Jail have tested positive for COVID-19. 2 of them are showing symptoms. Sheriff Mike Lunder says they spotted the outbreak last week when 1 inmate tested positive. After that, he says the jail immediately enhanced their testing, isolation, and temperature checks. And an increase in cases is canceling some popular local events. Zoo Montana announced this year's Montana Renaissance Festival and Boo at the Zoo will not happen. It's a blow to some revenue streams the zoo was counting on. The Renaissance Festival was expected to draw nearly 8,000 people. Boo at the Zoo typically draws 5,000. Now we go to Bozeman, where Montana State University students are unpacking and settling into their dorm rooms. MTN's Cody Boyer helped some families on the last day of move-in and tells us 2020 had some lasting impacts for MSU.
In the past, Montana State University students have all used a single day to move into the dorms in full. But this year, they spread that over 4, and for good reason. Because MSU has had around 4,500 students sign up just for their dorm halls this year. Oh, don't want to forget this.
It's a shot of vitality for our campus.
Whether they drove, flew in from out of state and country, or marched, more than 4,000 students made their way back into MSU's multi-level halls, with only a few stragglers. I caught up with the last 4 families dropping off their students over at Highlight Hall, who, while didn't want to talk on camera, still had me help them load the last of their stuff into the hall. Hi there. Each excited to start, but carrying masks and refreshed concerns from last year. One said they were from Brazil.
We do have international students coming in. People are facing all sorts of travel difficulties all over the world. And so the same is true of families sending their students overseas to study.
One family telling me they wanted their students fully vaccinated before heading back to class, but praised the lack of a mask requirement. In part of her letter to the MSU community last week, MSU President Wadad Cruzado wrote that her, quote, strong appeal to all members of the same community is that we do this together, not because because it is mandated or required. But she also wrote, quote, if there is rampant disregard for the need to wear face masks in indoor spaces, end quote, or Gallatin County shows a sustained increase of COVID hospitalizations, MSU will revert to mandating masks. And while clean cat kits are no longer available this year, university leaders say sanitizing stations are standing sentry campus-wide.
It's an energetic fall, and we've got a lot of people who are a lot of excited to get into classes tomorrow.
At Yellowstone Hall on Montana State University's campus, Cody Boyer, MTN News.
Thank you very much, Cody. MSU officials say 2021 enrollment numbers are still in the works, but predict they will be notably higher than 2020. In crime news, the family of a Billings woman who was murdered at a campsite in Utah is calling for answers. 24-year-old Kylan Schulte and her wife of about 4 months, 38-year-old Crystal Turner, were living at a campsite in the LaSalle Mountains when they were found shot to death. Friends said before their death, they mentioned a man hanging around their campsite, making them feel uncomfortable.
Saturday that they met up with, they said they were going to go move. They were going to go pack up and move their campsite. That it was like he was still creeping them out. What is very uncomforting is that there 100% is a murderer on the loose.
The FBI has joined the case to help solve the double murder. Also making headlines this morning, more than 70,000 people have been evacuated from Afghanistan. No Americans have died since the Taliban takeover began on August 14th. But there are still thousands hoping to get out, and the U.S. military is planning to withdraw its troops next week. CBS's Ian Lee has the latest on the evacuation efforts.
The United States continues to evacuate thousands from Afghanistan every day.
The first hope is God, and the second hope is the United States government to help them, to take them out of there.
Nizar got out just before Kabul fell to the Taliban and now lives with family in California.
Me, I was working with the U.S. government for 5 years. I have the documentation that I was able to get out of Kabul. But the people, there are too many people that they don't have anything on their hands because it happens as a sudden and they were not prepared for it.
The U.S. military is working to get Americans and Afghan allies out before they withdraw on August 31st. President Biden is confident they'll meet that deadline.
The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops.
Mr. Biden has asked the Pentagon and State Department for contingency plans.
The completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who were transporting out and no disruptions to our operation.
Taliban leaders say they are blocking Afghan citizens from reaching the airport. Another threat to the mission, an Islamic State affiliate known as ISIS-K.
Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians.
Lawmakers from both parties want the White House to scrap its deadline and only leave after the last American is out of Afghanistan. Ian Lee, CBS News.
Two congressmen, Massachusetts Democrat Seth Moulton and Michigan Republican Peter Meyer, secretly flew to Kabul. The two military veterans said they wanted to provide oversight on the executive branch. A White House official called the move selfish, irresponsible, and dangerous, adding they will be occupying seats on their return to the U.S. that should be going to those in need. House Democrats have voted to move forward with President Biden's two-track infrastructure plan and a major voting rights bill. It's a legislative victory for the president, but it's not a done deal. CBS's Bradley Blackburn has the details.
The resolution is adopted.
House Democrats held together to keep President Biden's infrastructure agenda moving forward, despite some resistance from party moderates.
Today, the House of Representatives has taken significant step toward making a historic investment that's going to transform America.
The vote approved the $3.5 trillion budget blueprint on so-called human infrastructure, new spending on childcare, health care, and the environment. They also committed to a vote by September 27th on the $1 trillion bipartisan physical infrastructure bill.
Today is a great day of pride for our country and for Democrats.
Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy criticized the vote, saying the House should be focused instead on bringing Americans home from Afghanistan.
It is an embarrassing day to America. It's an embarrassing day for this floor, and it's embarrassing that you would even move forward with it.
In a separate vote, the House also approved the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, sending it to the Senate. Named for the former congressman and civil rights leader, the bill is meant to shore up the 1965 Voting Rights Act that's been weakened by the Supreme Court.
As part of the effort to make sure we push back against the intense voter suppression that we've seen take shape all across America and protect our democracy.
The bill would give the federal government more oversight over some state voting laws, but it is unlikely to pass in the Senate, where Democrats do not appear to have enough votes to overcome Republican opposition. Bradley Blackburn, CBS News.
Senate Republicans call the voting rights bill unnecessary and a Democrat power grab. Democrats fear new GOP laws in several states will make it harder for many Americans to vote. Thank you so much for starting your Wednesday with us here on Montana This Morning. Coming up, travel agents aren't as popular as they once were, but some say during the pandemic, it's nice to have one, especially if you're planning a trip abroad. We'll explain why after the break. It's 52 degrees in downtown Billings and the time is now 5:16. We'll be right back.